The gallery stretched endlessly in every direction, its walls shimmering with images that moved like living memories. Commander Elena Voss walked slowly through the hall, her boots echoing against the crystalline floor. Each panel displayed a different scene of destruction. Cities burning, fleets colliding in space, landscapes scarred by weapons she couldn't name. But these weren't warnings or historical records. They were exhibits. Magnificent, isn't it? The voice came from behind her, smooth and melodic. Elena turned to face Ambassador Thyron, the Valar representative who had brought her to this place. His form was humanoid but wrong in subtle ways, too tall, with joints that bent at angles that made her eyes hurt. His skin rippled with colors that shifted based on his mood. Currently a deep violet that she'd learned meant satisfaction. "You're showing me massacres," Elena said flatly. "We're showing you art." Thyron glided closer, his movements fluid. The siege of Corvallis 9. 300 years of planning, executed over the course of 17 days. The composer was Warlord Shurin. Notice the symmetry in how the defensive lines collapsed, the rhythm of the orbital bombardments, the way civilian evacuations created these beautiful patterns of chaos. He gestured at the panel with something like reverence. Elena's stomach turned. Those were people dying. Of course. Thyron's colors shifted to pale blue. Confusion. All great art requires sacrifice. Your own species understands this. Your painters use materials harvested from the earth. Your musicians create tension and release. Your dancers push their bodies to breaking points. We simply work on a grander scale. There's a difference between what and what, Commander? Thyron interrupted, his tone still pleasant. Between scales? Between mediums? Your species has fought thousands of wars. We've studied them. Some of your conflicts showed genuine promise. The tactical innovations of your World War II, the psychological complexity of your Cold War, even the asymmetric beauty of your recent insurgencies. But you treat these achievements as tragedies. You apologize for your greatest works. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly. She'd been briefed before coming here, warned that the Valar thought differently than humans, but the briefings hadn't prepared her for this. For standing in a museum dedicated to genocide, listening to an alien describe atrocities like they were paintings. "Why am I here?" she asked. Thyron's colors brightened to gold. Excitement. "Because you've been selected, Commander Voss. Your species has reached the threshold. You have the tools, the creativity, the capacity for organized violence. Now you must prove you can wield them with artistry." "Prove it how?" "The exhibition." Thyron swept his arm across the gallery. "Every species that wishes to join the Valar Collective must contribute to our cultural legacy. We don't want your resources or your territory. We want your art. And the only art that matters is the Arvor." Elena's hand instinctively moved to her sidearm, though she knew it would be useless here. "You want us to fight you. A demonstration, yes, a performance. We will engage in structured conflict. Your species against a Valar force of equivalent size and technology. The battle will take place over the course of one standard month on a neutral world. You will be given time to prepare, to train, to develop your strategies. And then you will show us what humanity can create. And if we refuse," Thyron's colors darkened to black, "then you will be unfinished. A sketch that never became a painting. We cannot allow unfinished works to persist in our galaxy. They disrupt the aesthetic. They introduce randomness where there should be design. You'll destroy us. We'll conclude you." Thyron's voice remained gentle, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "Consider a mercy. Better to never exist in the record than to exist as something incomplete. Better silence than dissonance." Elena stared at the alien, trying to find some hint of malice or cruelty in his expression. But there was nothing. He believed every word. To him, exterminating an entire species wasn't murder. It was quality control. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked. "Your leaders have already agreed. Did they not tell you?" Thyron tilted his head. "The exhibition begins in 6 months. You've been chosen as a composer, the one who will design humanity's performance. We selected you based on your military record. Your tactics in the Martian Rebellion showed genuine creativity. The way you used the moon's gravity wells to mask your fleet movements. The false surrender at Olympus Mons that lured the Separatists into range. These were beautiful touches. Those were desperate moves. People died. Artists always doubt themselves. Thyra moved toward the exit, gesturing for her to follow. Come, let me show you the arena where you'll perform. Let me introduce you to Conductor Vale, who will compose the Valer counterpiece. You'll have much to learn from each other before the exhibition begins. Elena didn't move. She looked back at the gallery, at the countless images of death and destruction presented as masterpieces, at the civilizations that had either passed this test or been erased for failing it. What happens if we win? She asked quietly. Thyron's colors flickered through a spectrum she couldn't interpret. Winning isn't the goal, Commander. Beauty is the goal. Artistry is the goal. But yes, if your performance demonstrates sufficient mastery, humanity will join the collective. You'll have access to our technology, our knowledge, our entire cultural legacy. You'll become contributors to the greatest gallery in the universe. And if we lose, then at least your final work will be remembered. Immortality through art, Commander. Isn't that what all creators dream of? He walked through the doorway, leaving Elena alone with the ghosts of 1,000 dead worlds, each one preserved forever as a monument to someone else's vision of perfection. The training facility orbited a dead moon, its surface cratered and gray. Elena stood in the observation deck, watching her fleet conduct drills below. 300 ships, frigates, destroyers, carriers, moving in formation against holographic enemies. Behind her, the tactical team argued over deployment strategies, their voices tense and exhausted. They'd been here for 4 months, and the exhibition was 8 weeks away. They're watching us, Lieutenant Chen said, appearing at her shoulder. He nodded toward the far side of the deck, where 3 Valer observers stood motionless, their skin colors shifting through patterns Elena had learned to recognize as note-taking. They watch everything, the way we eat, sleep, fight, like we're insects under glass. Let them watch, Elena said. Maybe they'll learn something. Chen laughed bitterly. What could we possibly teach them? They've been doing this for millennia. We're the newcomers trying to impress the masters. Elena turned to face him. You sound like you've already lost. I sound like I'm realistic. Chen's voice dropped lower. I've been studying their previous exhibitions, the records they let us access. Commander, in the last 500 years, only 12 species have joined the collective. 12 out of 47 who attempted the exhibition. Do you know what happened to the other 35? They were concluded, erased, completely. Not just their military. Every colony, every outpost, every ship in space. The Valer don't believe in half measures. If we fail, there won't be anyone left to remember we tried. Elena looked back at the fleet. Thousands of people down there, training for a battle that wasn't about territory or survival in any conventional sense. Training to be judged by aliens who saw their deaths as potential brushstrokes in a larger composition. Then we don't fail, she said. How? Chen's frustration broke through his usual composure. How do we fight an enemy that doesn't want to win? That wants to create? I've run 1,000 simulations. Elena, every conventional strategy, every tactical innovation we can conceive. The Valer counted them all. Not because they're trying to defeat us, because they're anticipating our moves and responding with something more aesthetically interesting. Then we have to think differently. We've been thinking differently for 4 months. The tactical team had gone quiet, watching their exchange. Elena could see the fear in their faces, the exhaustion. They'd all volunteered for this, knowing what was at stake, knowing they might be designing humanity's epitaph. Show me the arena again, Elena said. Chun pulled up the holographic display. The battlefield materialized between them. A planet called Rishold, chosen by the Valer for its dramatic potential. Diverse terrain, mountains, oceans, sprawling plains. 3 continents separated by narrow seas. The Valer fleet would begin at the northern pole, humanity's fleet at the southern. Ground forces would be deployed simultaneously. The battle would last exactly 30 days, starting and ending at predetermined times. It's too structured, Elena muttered, studying the topography. Too controlled. Real wars aren't like this. That's the point, said Major Park, one of her strategic advisors. They've removed all the chaos, all the unpredictability. This isn't war. It's a dance with steps we don't know. Elena circled the hologram slowly. What have the successful species done? The 12 who passed. Park pulled up archive footage. They varied. The Kreth used swarm tactics, overwhelming numbers coordinated with perfect precision. The Veiler described it as recursive harmony. The Teln fought defensively, creating layered fortifications that collapsed inward like a flower closing. Called it the geometry of inevitability. The pattern seems to be that each species showcased something unique to their nature, something the Veiler hadn't seen before. What's unique about humanity? Chen asked. We're not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the most coordinated. What do we have that would impress gods of war? Elena stared at the hologram, her mind racing. She thought about the Martian rebellion, the tactics that had gotten her selected for this nightmare. She'd won that conflict not through superior firepower, but through improvisation, through lying, through making the enemy think she was doing one thing while actually doing another. Deception, she said quietly. The others looked at her. What? Park asked. We're good at lying, at misdirection. Elena's voice gained strength. Every species they've shown us fought honestly. They showcase their strengths directly. But humans? We build our entire military history on deception. Trojan horses, false flags, camouflage, misinformation. We're a species that evolved lying to each other as a survival mechanism. Chen frowned. You want to trick them? Elena, they're studying us constantly. They know every tactical doctrine we've ever written, every historical battle. They'll see through anything we plan. Maybe Elena smiled for the first time in weeks. Or maybe we give them exactly what they expect, and then we change the rules. The rules are fixed, Park objected. The Veiler designed the exhibition. We can't change their rules, Elena interrupted. But we can change what the rules mean. They want art. They want something they've never seen. Then we give them the most human thing we can create, which is a story with an unreliable narrator. The tactical team exchanged glances. Chun stepped closer to the hologram. Explain. Elena's mind was moving fast now, pieces clicking together. They're expecting a military performance. Tactics, strategy, execution. But what if we treat this like theater instead? What if every move we make is part of a larger narrative that only becomes clear at the end? You're talking in riddles, Park said. I'm talking about structure. Beginning, middle, end. Setup and payoff. Elena manipulated the hologram, highlighting different regions of threshold. We open with something conventional. Give them a first act that follows every expected pattern. Let them think they understand what we're doing. Then in Act 2, we introduce complications. Strange decisions that seem like mistakes. Moves that don't make tactical sense. Make them question whether we know what we're doing. Make them think we're failing, Chen said slowly, understanding dawning. Exactly. Let them see humanity struggling. Let them see us make errors. Let them judge us as amateurs who don't understand the art form. Elena's hands moved faster across the display. And then, in Act 3, we revealed that every mistake was intentional, that the entire performance was a magic trick, and they were watching the wrong hand the whole time. Park shook her head. That's incredibly risky. If they conclude we're incompetent before the reveal, they might end the exhibition early, conclude us for being unworthy. Or, Elena countered, they might be fascinated, might want to see how the story ends. Remember, they're not just warriors. They're critics, audiences, and audiences hate leaving before the finale. Chun pulled up historical data. No species has ever attempted narrative misdirection on this scale. It's either brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both, Elena admitted, but it's the only advantage we have. They know our weapons, our tactics, our history, but they don't understand human storytelling. They don't understand how we can believe one thing completely and then flip our entire perspective when new information emerges. That cognitive flexibility, that ability to hold multiple contradictory truths, that's our art form. The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of instruments. Below, the fleet continued its drills, unaware that their commander was planning to turn their deaths into the setup for a punchline that might save their species. "We need to commit fully," Park said finally. "Every soldier would need to perform. One person breaking character could ruin everything. Then we train them as actors, not just warriors," Elena said. "We teach them the role they're playing in the story. And we make sure the Veilers see exactly what we want them to see." Chen looked at her with something between admiration and terror. "You're gambling everything on the idea that they'll appreciate the twist more than they'll hate being deceived. I'm gambling on the idea that artists, even alien ones, respect innovation above all else. That showing them something genuinely new is worth more than showing them something perfectly executed." Elena met his gaze. "Because perfect execution is what they expect. Surprise is what they'll remember." The first day of the exhibition arrived with ceremony. Velar observation vessels ringed Threshold's orbit, their hulls adorned with luminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm, an audience taking their seats. Elena stood on the bridge of the carrier Prometheus, watching her fleet descend toward the southern continent. Every ship broadcasted its position openly, exactly as military doctrine dictated. Textbook deployment. Predictable and clean. "They're mirroring us," Chen reported from Tactical. "Conductor Vale's fleet is establishing a symmetrical formation at the northern pole. Ground forces landing in standard dispersal pattern." Elena nodded. Act 1 had begun. For the next week, humanity would fight exactly as the Valer expected. Competently, conventionally, and ultimately predictably. She drilled her commanders mercilessly on this phase. Every maneuver had to look professional but uninspired. They needed to appear skilled but not creative. Major part, begin the eastern advance. Frigate screen first, destroyers in support formation. By the book. The fleet moved. On Threshold surface, human ground forces established fortifications along the southern mountain range. Armored divisions rolled across the plains. Artillery positioned on high ground with clear sightlines. Everything the Valer would have seen in 1,000 previous conflicts. And the Valer responded beautifully. Conductor Vale's forces met them with what Elena could only describe as aggressive elegance. His ships didn't just engage, they performed. Fighters swooped in patterns that created visual harmonies. Bombardments fell in sequences that had rhythmic precision. When 2 Valer cruisers destroyed a human destroyer, they did it with such perfect timing that the explosions bloomed simultaneously, creating a symmetrical flower of fire against Threshold's atmosphere. "It's like they're showing off," Lieutenant Morrison said from communications, her voice tinged with awe and horror. "They are," Elena replied. "They're establishing the baseline, showing us what real artistry looks like. Let them," with the opening act. The warm-up. The week progressed in escalating violence. Humanity lost 12 ships and 3,000 ground troops. The Valer lost 8 ships and fewer soldiers. Their casualties always arranged in aesthetically pleasing numbers. 8, 16, 64. Powers of 2, Elena noticed. Even their deaths followed mathematical beauty. The Valer observers recorded everything, their colors shifting through patterns of what Elena had learned to interpret as critical analysis. Judging, evaluating, finding humanity's performance adequate but unremarkable. Perfect. On day 8, Elena initiated Act 2. "All ships, execute protocol dissonance," she ordered. The human fleet's formation began to fragment. Ships broke from their squadrons without apparent reason. The eastern advance stalled as destroyers received contradictory orders. Ground forces on the central continent pulled back from defensible positions to occupy indefensible valleys. Artillery fired at targets that made no strategic sense, wasting ammunition on empty terrain. To any observer, it looked like command was breaking down, like the stress of fighting the Valer was fragmenting humanity's coordination. Chun played his role perfectly, his voice rising with false panic over the command channel. "Prometheus, this is Tactical. We're receiving conflicting reports from ground commanders. 3rd Battalion claims they were ordered to abandon the Western Ridge. I have no record of that order. Confirm their position, Elena said, letting frustration enter her voice. And find out who's issuing unauthorized commands. Working on it, but static interrupted Chen's transmission. Carefully engineered interference that made it seem like their communications were degrading. Multiple units reporting confusion. Commander, I think we might be experiencing systemic failures. The performance spread throughout the fleet. Captains questioned orders. Units hesitated. The crisp military precision of Act 1 dissolved into apparent chaos. But it was choreographed chaos, every mistake calibrated. They had to look incompetent enough to concern the Veiler, but not so incompetent that the exhibition would be ended early. Elena watched the Veiler observation vessels closely. Their luminescent patterns had changed, pulsing faster. Confusion? Interest? Disappointment? She couldn't be sure. Conductor Vale's forces adapted instantly. His fleet tightened formation, pressing the advantage. His ground troops advanced across terrain humanity had inexplicably abandoned. The Veiler weren't just winning. They were creating magnificent tableaus of victory. A bridge collapsed with perfect timing as their armor crossed it, stranding human defenders on the far side. Orbital strikes carved patterns into the landscape that could be seen from space. Humanity was losing badly. Publicly, obviously. Commander, Major Park said during a private briefing on Day 12, her face pale. The casualties are real, even if the confusion is fake. We're sacrificing people for this performance. Is it worth it? Elena had asked herself the same question every night. Every soldier knows what we're doing. They volunteered for this specific plan. And if it works, we save billions. If it fails... She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the alternative. By Day 15, the exact midpoint, humanity had lost 40% of its fleet and controlled only a third of the planet's surface. The Veiler observers' colors had shifted to pale yellow, which the briefings had identified as sympathy mixed with disdain. They thought humanity was collapsing. That Earth's military, when faced with true artistic warfare, had been found wanting. Elena stood alone in her quarters at night, studying the holographic battlefield. Red markers showed human positions scattered, defensive, diminishing. Blue markers showed Veiler positions, concentrated, aggressive, expanding. It looked like a rout, but overlaid on the display, visible only to her, were the green markers, the hidden markers, the pieces she'd been positioning since Day 1. Every abandoned position held concealed listening posts. Every confused unit had actually been moving into camouflage staging areas. Every wasted artillery shell had actually been deploying sensor networks across the planet. For 2 weeks, while appearing to fall apart, humanity had been building the largest intelligence apparatus the Veiler had ever unknowingly faced. They'd been planting the punchline while the Veiler watched the setup. Prometheus to all ships, Elena transmitted on the encrypted command channel that night. The one the Veiler didn't know existed because humans had hidden inside what appeared to be normal engine telemetry. Act 2 complete. All units, prepare for Act 3. The reveal begins at dawn. Across threshold, in fortifications that looked weak, in valleys that looked indefensible, in ships that looked damaged, 5,000 human soldiers and sailors received the message and smiled in the darkness. They'd spent 2 weeks pretending to lose. Tomorrow, they'd show the Veiler what humanity's real art form looked like. The art of the con. The beauty of the twist. The moment when the audience realizes they've been watching the wrong thing the entire time. Elena pulled up the final battle plans, the real ones, and began reviewing them one last time. Conductor Vale had positioned his forces exactly as she predicted, drawn forward by the appearance of human weakness. He created beautiful formations, perfect geometries. His fleet orbited threshold in patterns that would be studied for generations in Veiler academies. And he'd put himself exactly where Elena wanted him. Sleep well, conductor, she whispered to the hologram. Tomorrow, you're going to see something new. Tomorrow, humanity shows you that the best art isn't what you plan. It's what you hide. Outside her window, threshold rotated slowly, its surface dotted with fires from 2 weeks of warfare. The Veiler observers maintained their positions, recording what they thought was humanity's inevitable defeat. Their colors had settled into soft blues and greens, contentment mixed with mild disappointment. The exhibition was proceeding as expected, if not as impressively as they'd hoped. None of them suspected that the chaos they'd been watching was more choreographed than any Velar battle formation, that every mistake had been intentional, that the humans hadn't been fighting to win individual engagements. They'd been fighting to tell a story. And every good story needs a moment when everything changes, when the audience realizes they've been fooled, when suddenly, impossibly, the losing side reveals they were winning all along. Elena set her alarm for 3 hours before dawn. She'd need time to review the final coordination, time to make sure every unit understood their role in Act 3, time to prepare for the moment when humanity would either earn their place among the stars or be erased from existence for having the audacity to lie to gods. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. It never did before opening night. Dawn broke over Threshold's equator with manufactured precision. The Velar had adjusted the planet's rotation to ensure optimal lighting for Day 16. Elena watched from Prometheus as golden light spilled across continents scarred by 2 weeks of combat. The Velar fleet hung in orbit like jewels on a string, their formations pristine and confident. All units, this is Prometheus. Elena transmitted on the open channel, the one the Velar had been monitoring since day one. Her voice carried exhaustion, defeat. We're falling back to the southern pole for final defensive positions. All ground forces, begin evacuation protocols. We'll make our stand there. Across the planet, human forces began their retreat. Transports lifted off from forward positions, heading south. Artillery pieces were abandoned. Fortifications were left unmanned. It looked like the end, humanity gathering its remnants for one last desperate stand before inevitable conclusion. The Velar observers' colors blazed with gold and crimson, triumph mixed with aesthetic satisfaction. This was a finale they'd expected, the beautiful, tragic ending where humanity would make one glorious last stand before being overwhelmed. Conductor Vale's forces began their advance, moving with the confidence of artists adding final brushstrokes to a masterpiece. "They're taking the bait," Chin whispered beside Elena, speaking on an encrypted channel. All major Velar forces are converging on the southern continent. Ground troops moving through the central valleys. Fleet repositioning for orbital bombardment support. Elena counted slowly to 10, watching the tactical display. Vale's forces were magnificent even in pursuit. His fleet moved in spiraling patterns. His ground forces advanced in waves that created visual rhythm. He was crafting humanity's defeat with the same care a sculptor approaches marble. And he was putting every major asset exactly where Elena needed them. "Execute revision," she said quietly. Across Threshold, the performance changed genres. The abandoned fortifications erupted with activity. Hidden blast doors opened, revealing artillery batteries that had never been removed, only concealed. The sensor networks planted over 2 weeks of wasted ammunition came online simultaneously, giving humanity perfect intelligence on every Velar position. The confused units that had occupied indefensible valleys revealed why those valleys had been chosen. They were kill boxes, overlooked by weapons platforms hidden in terrain the Velar hadn't bothered to scan because they'd assumed humanity was too disorganized to set traps. The retreating transports that had lifted off didn't head south. They'd never intended to. Instead, they broke in all directions, revealing themselves as combat dropships that had been pretending to evacuate. They fell on Velar rear positions like hammers, catching supply lines and command posts completely unprepared. And the human fleet, which had spent 2 weeks appearing to fragment and fail, suddenly moved with precision that made the Velar formations look clumsy by comparison. Ships that had seemed damaged revealed themselves as fully operational. The communications breakdown that had plagued humanity's forces vanished instantly, replaced by coordination so tight it seemed telepathic, because it had all been theater. Every confused order, every abandoned position, every tactical blunder had been a lie wrapped in enough truth to make the Velar believe it. "Northern continent is secure," Park reported, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "Vale supply depots are ours. His reinforcements are cut off. Central Valley's reporting enemy casualties at 87%. Morrison added. The ambush worked. They walked right into our firing lanes. Elena watched Conductor Vale's fleet scramble to respond. For the first time in the exhibition, the Valar forces looked disorganized. Ships broke formation, trying to respond to threats that appeared from directions they'd thought were secure. On the ground, Valar troops found themselves surrounded in terrain they'd thought they'd conquered. The Valar observation vessel's colors had gone completely white. Shock, she knew. Pure, absolute shock. They'd never seen anything like this. Never seen a species deliberately perform incompetence. Never imagined that humanity would spend 2 weeks losing on purpose, sacrificing thousands of lives, just to create a reversal this complete. Prometheus, this is Vale. The conductor's voice came through on the open channel, and for the first time, Elena heard emotion in a Valar's words. Confusion, anger, but underneath it, something else. You deceived us. You pretended to fail. We showed you what we wanted you to see, Elena replied calmly. Isn't that what art is? Controlling perception? Making the audience believe one thing, so the reveal hits harder. Silence filled the channel. Elena could imagine Vale on his command ship, his colors cycling through patterns of species had never needed before. How does one process being outmaneuvered by what should have been easy prey? This is... Vale's voice trailed off. This is not warfare. This is dishonesty. This is human warfare. Elena corrected. You wanted to see our art. You wanted something unique to our species. Did you think our art would look like yours? That we'd fight with your aesthetics, your values, your sense of honor? The other species fought to impress you. We fought to surprise you. There's a difference. Elena manipulated her tactical display, sending new orders. Her fleet was pressing the advantage now, driving Vale's forces back toward the northern pole. Every species you've tested showed you their strength directly. We showed you our weakness, and then we showed you it was a mask. The battle raged across threshold, but the momentum had shifted completely. Valar forces, despite their superior technology and training, were reeling. They'd built their entire strategy around humanity's apparent failures, and now that foundation had shattered. Every position they'd taken was revealed as a trap. Every advantage they'd gained was actually a disadvantage. You sacrifice your own people, Vale said, his voice heavy, to maintain the deception. Thousands died to make us believe. Yes, Elena didn't flinch from the truth, because billions more would die if we failed. That's the calculation. That's the art. Not just the tactics, but the cost, the weight. You fought wars for beauty. We fight wars for survival. And survival makes you willing to paint with darker colors. On her display, the Valar forces were collapsing to a final defensive position on the northern continent. Ironically, almost exactly where humanity had pretended to fall back to on the southern side. Vale was doing what Elena had faked, gathering his forces for a last stand. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. All units hold positions, Elena ordered. Her fleet stopped its advance, surrounding but not attacking the Valar position. Cease fire. Commander? Chin looked at her in confusion. We have them. We can end this. That's not how the story ends, Elena said quietly. She opened a direct channel to Vale. Conductor, you have 6 days left in the exhibition. I'm proposing something unprecedented. What? Vale's voice was wary. A collaboration. You've been composing against us, fighting to create your own masterpiece in response to ours. But what if we compose together? What if the last 6 days weren't human art versus Valar art, but a joint performance? Something neither species could create alone. The channel fell silent. Elena could feel her crew staring at her. This wasn't in the plan. This was improvisation. The most human thing of all. Changing the script mid-performance because the audience's reaction suggested a better ending. You want to work together? Vale sounded genuinely baffled. That's not. There's no precedent for this in exhibition history. Exactly, Elena said. Which means it's never been done. Which means it would be new. Isn't that what you value most? Innovation. She waited, barely breathing. This was the real gamble. Not the tactics or the deception, but this moment, betting that the Veiler's obsession with artistic novelty was stronger than their need to win. The observation vessel's colors were cycling rapidly. Debate, she suspected, the Veiler critics arguing among themselves about whether this violated the rules or transcended them. If we agree, Vale said slowly, what would this collaboration look like? Elena smiled. I have some ideas. But conductor, they're going to require you to trust me. Can your species do that? Another pause. Then, incredibly, Vale laughed, a sound like wind chimes a storm. Commander Voss, you've just proven that trust is a luxury neither of our species can afford. But perhaps that's precisely why we should try. The final 6 days of the exhibition became something the Veiler had never witnessed in 10,000 years of judging species. A negotiation conducted through warfare. Elena and Vale worked in tandem. Their forces no longer fighting to destroy each other, but to create something that transcended victory or defeat. On day 17, they choreographed a battle for the central continent that told a story in 3 movements. Human forces advanced from the south, while Veiler forces descended from the north, meeting in the vast plains where they fought chaotically during Act 2. But this time, every maneuver was coordinated. Ships danced around each other in patterns that created visual symphonies against Threshold's clouds. Ground forces engage and disengage in rhythms that built tension and release. Artillery fire bloomed across the landscape in sequences that spelled out mathematical equations in light, a dialogue between species conducted in explosions. They're using base 12 notation, Chin observed, watching the bombardment patterns. The Veiler count differently than we do. But look, we're responding in base 10, and somehow it's creating harmonic progressions. Elena watched 2 fighters, 1 human, 1 Veiler, spiral around each other in a double helix pattern before breaking away simultaneously. It's not about winning anymore. It's about conversation. We're learning their language while teaching them ours. The Veiler observer's colors had shifted to patterns Elena had never seen before. Deep purple swirled with gold, occasionally flashing to brilliant white. She'd checked the brief of materials. There were no records of this color combination. They were watching something that required emotional responses their species hadn't cataloged yet. On day 19, Vale proposed something audacious. Commander, what if we staged a false mutual destruction? Both fleets positioned so that any observer would believe we'd annihilated each other. And then from the ashes, a joint force emerges. Death and resurrection as collaborative art. That's never been done? Elena asked. Never. Exhibitions always end with clear victories or noble defeats. The idea of both sides dying and being reborn as something new, it violates every aesthetic principle we have. Which makes it perfect, Elena said. Let's kill our old selves and create something neither of us could be alone. They spent 2 days planning the sequence. It required trust that went against every military instinct both species possessed. Human and Veiler ships would position themselves in a massive orbital formation, then trigger a chain reaction to controlled explosions that would look to any sensor like complete annihilation. In the chaos of fire and debris, the ships would actually be conducting precision maneuvers to slip into prearranged positions on Threshold's surface, hidden by the electromagnetic interference of the explosions themselves. If this goes wrong, Park warned, we could actually destroy both fleets for real. The margins are microscopic. Art is risk, Elena replied, echoing something Nyron had told her in the gallery months ago. Safe performances are forgettable performances. On day 21, they executed the maneuver. For 17 minutes, every sensor trained on Threshold registered catastrophic mutual destruction. Both fleets appeared to tear themselves apart in a cascading failure that turned orbital space into an expanding cloud of superheated debris. The observation vessels recoiled, their colors flashing between black and white. Horror and ecstasy mixing in real time. And then, as the debris cleared, 200 ships, human and Veiler flying in mixed formations, rose from Threshold's surface in perfect unison. They'd survived by appearing to die. They'd collaborated by individually sacrificing the appearance of victory. The observation vessel's colors exploded into patterns so complex they hurt Elena's eyes to watch. The Veiler critics were experiencing something unprecedented, and their physiological responses couldn't keep up with the emotional overload. We did it, Chin whispered, watching the mixed fleet climb toward orbit in spiraling helixes. We actually pulled it off. But Elena's attention was on the final 3 days. The collaboration had worked, but she needed to give it an ending that would resonate beyond the exhibition itself. She opened a private channel to Vale. "Conductor, I want to propose something for the finale. Something that will either get us both celebrated or both erased. At this point, Commander, those outcomes seem equally appealing. What do you have in mind?" We end by refusing to end. We take our mixed fleet, and we leave Threshold on day 24. We don't wait for the exhibition to officially conclude. We just stop performing, leave the stage while the audience is still watching. Silence stretched across the channel. Then Vale's voice returned, tight with something that might have been fear or exhilaration. That would be interpreted as abandonment, as unfinished work. The observation vessels would be obligated to conclude both our species. Or, Elena countered, they'd be forced to confront the idea that a performance doesn't end when they say it does. That art isn't defined by the gallery, but by the artists. You told me once that you can't allow unfinished works to exist in your galaxy. But what if we show them that finish is a choice? That knowing when to stop is part of the artistry? You're asking me to bet my entire species on a philosophical point. I'm asking you to collaborate on creating something that changes how your species thinks about art itself. Isn't that the highest form of innovation? Not just new tactics or strategies, but new ways of thinking. Elena could hear Vale breathing, a sound she'd never heard from a Valer before. If I agree to this, I can never return to the collective. Neither of us could. We'd be outlaws, unfinished works that refuse to be concluded. Then we'd be outlaws together. Two species that chose freedom over perfection. Elena looked at her crew on the bridge, exhausted, terrified, hopeful. We spent this entire exhibition teaching each other. You've shown me that warfare can be beautiful. I want to show you that beauty can be incomplete. That sometimes the most powerful art is the kind that leave the audience wanting more. The final 3 days became a meditation on endings. Human and Valer forces conducted smaller engagements, each one a miniature masterpiece, but deliberately unresolved. They started battles they didn't finish. They created patterns that trailed off into silence. Every maneuver asked the question, does art require resolution, or is the tension itself the point? On day 23, Elena and Vale met in person for the first time, in a neutral chamber on Threshold surface. The Valer conductor was even taller than Elena had imagined, his colors cycling slowly through contemplative blues and greens. "Tomorrow we leave," Elena said. "Together. Are you certain?" "Certainty is the enemy of art," Vale replied. "You taught me that. Or perhaps I always knew it and needed someone from outside my culture to give me permission to admit it." His colors shifted to deep violet. The shade Elena had learned meant profound emotion. The observation vessels are already debating what our collaboration means. Some call it the most innovative exhibition in history. Others call it a violation of everything the exhibitions are meant to be. And you, I call it the first honest collaboration between our species. Not performed for judges, but created because we chose to create it together. Vale's colors flickered. "Tomorrow, when we leave, we'll likely be declared enemies of the collective, hunted, concluded if they catch us. Then we'd better not get caught," Elena said. "Besides, I suspect we won't be alone for long. There are probably other species in your galaxy who are tired of being judged, who might want to create art that isn't performed for approval. You're talking about rebellion. I'm talking about collaboration. Real collaboration, not the kind conducted in an arena for an audience." Elena extended her hand, a human gesture she taught Vale during their planning sessions. "Are you ready to find out what our species can create when no one's watching?" Vale's colors shifted to gold as he clasped her hand with his strange, angular fingers. "Commander Voss, I suspect we're about to become the most famous unfinished work in galactic history." On day 24, at the exact moment the exhibition was scheduled to conclude, the combined human-Valer fleet activated their jump drives and vanished from Threshold's orbit. They didn't wait for judgment, didn't stay for the verdict. They simply left, together, heading for coordinates neither species had shared with the collective. Behind them, the observation vessel's colors exploded into chaos. The Veiler critics were screaming at each other in light patterns, some demanding immediate pursuit and conclusion, others arguing that what they'd witnessed transcended traditional categories entirely. The debate would rage for years, splitting the collective into factions that had never existed before. But Elena didn't see any of that. She was on Prometheus, watching thresholds shrink in the view screen as human, and Veiler ships flew side by side into unexplored space. "Where are we going?" Chen asked. "Somewhere we can finish becoming whatever we're becoming," Elena said. "Somewhere we can create art that's just for us, not for critics, not for survival, just because we want to." "That's not very strategic," Park observed, but she was smiling. "No," Elena agreed, "but it might be beautiful." Behind them, in galleries spanning hundreds of worlds, the recordings of their exhibition would play on infinite loops. Veiler scholars would study every moment, arguing about whether humanity had passed or failed, whether the collaboration was genius or blasphemy. Some species would be inspired to attempt their own innovations. Others would retreat further into tradition. And in the space between star systems, in the darkness where no one was watching, two species who'd met as potential enemies were learning to exist as something new, something unfinished and undefined, something that refused to be concluded. Elena thought about the gallery where this had all started, where Thyron had shown her countless dead civilizations preserved as art. She wondered if humanity would be added to those walls eventually, concluded for their audacity, or if maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way to escape the gallery altogether. "Prometheus to all ships," she transmitted. "Jump coordinates confirmed. Let's see what's out there beyond the critics and the judges. Let's find out what art looks like when it's created for its own sake." The fleet jumped, disappearing into the vast unknown, leaving behind only questions and the echoes of explosions that had spelled out equations and fire, leaving behind an exhibition that would never be truly finished, only endlessly debated, leaving behind the beginning of something that two species would spend lifetimes learning to name. The observation vessels eventually returned to their home worlds, carrying recordings of the strangest exhibition in history. And in the quiet moments between official debates, some Veiler critics would watch the finale again and again, that moment when the mixed fleet simply vanished, and their colors would shift to patterns that had no official meaning, patterns that might have been envy, or possibly hope.